We're going to take this tally counter and modify it. At this point, the tally counter uses a label to hold the value of the count. What we're going to do is change this to use a variable instead of a label. And the reason for that is if you have a lot of different values, instead of putting them all on the screen on a label or a text box, you can store them in variables which cannot be seen on the screen unless you take the value in the variable and place it on the screen. So you ask, well, where is this variable? And if you look at in the blocks tab under variables, you'll see various things. And what we're going to use for this particular video is a global variable. When you put this block on the screen, it says there's a block, a global variable of a certain name. You can give it your own name. I'm going to call it count. And the initial value is, well, I haven't given it one, but I'm going to start it off at 0. Like there. And what I'm going to do is, for the time being, I'm going to disable this block so that when the add button is clicked, this instruction will not take place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the variable for this operation. That is to say, when I click the add button, I'm going to have the count incremented by 1, meaning that the value will go up by 1. Well, how do you get the count? It turns out there are several, how do you put the count block on the screen? And it can be done several ways. One way is to hover over the name where it's initialized and you can get the set. Another way of doing it is by clicking on the variable blocks, choosing set, and then from the drop down choose a name, or if the name is individual enough, you can type in COUN and set. So there are 3 different ways of doing it, of putting your set variable on the screen. So what I'm going to do is, oh, I shouldn't have disabled that, but what I'm going to do is in the place of the count, what I'm going to do is use something called the get. And get works the same way as for set. That is to say, you can hover, as I've just done. You can click in variables, get a get, or you can type the name, and so this gets the value. Right? And I actually have a couple of warnings because I have unfilled blocks. All right. So what this is going to do is add up the total the count as I click this. But what's going to happen is nothing will appear on the screen. So here we go. Here's our emulator, and I click add, and nothing appears on the screen, even though I've been clicking on add and I've incremented or increased the value for count. But what I do now is I'm going to take the value of count and put it onto the screen here. And you might see something surprising. So when I click add, You would normally expect this to go up to 1, but the value of count is probably around 4 or 5. So it was at 6. So when I added 1 to it, I was adding 1 to the value which count had already had. So every time I clicked add previously, I had changed the value by 1. I had gotten that value of count up to 6, but it hadn't been displayed when I finally put this block in there so that the count would be displayed onto the label. That's when you saw it go from 6 to 7, and 7 was displayed. If I click subtract, what will happen is it will take the value that's on the label and subtract it. But if I click add, the value will be 8 because the value on the label and the value on the count are actually different. So I'm going to quickly change the subtract button so that it does the change of the count in the same way that the add button does. So I'm going to pause the video. So here you see the change, whereas I added the 1 to the global count here, I've subtracted 1 to the global count here. Here I put the global count onto the label, did the same thing here. The one thing I didn't change was this, because this will still be true. I will be putting the count onto the label and then checking the label here. I will modify this in a little bit, so I'll be checking the count itself rather than the text on the label. So let's see if this thing works. Here we go. I click subtract. Oh, great. Add. That seems to be working just fine. Now, what I'm going to do is make this small change by getting rid of this and do a little cleanup here. So we'll see if the count works for the conditional expression. Oh, can't go below 0, and great, that works. Now, we have a limit on the lower limit. We're not going to go below 0. What about an upper limit? Maybe we have to be concerned about fire regulations, and we can't let more than a certain number of people into the club or into the venue. We want to have another if statement to control the addition. In other words, we can't go above a certain value. We would do what we did for subtract for add. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space and put an if statement in and do all these things for the plus, and the condition is well, something like this. Well, the global count is, what do we want? Let's say 10 is our maximum number, and we want it to be what? Less than 10, less than or equal to 10. Now I'll make an error because we want to stop at 10. It turns out that this will not do what we want, because if the value of count is 10, it will allow us to increment that, and we'll end up with 11, which we shouldn't have. So here we go. All it's going to do is stop us from incrementing when this condition is true. We add, got up to 11, but that's it. Now the reason it allowed us to get to 11 is that it did allow us to add 1 to the count when the value was 10. So we'd have to change this to less than. At this point, I just want to show you a little trick that might be useful. Our value here is 11. If we needed a quick and dirty way of getting this back down to 0, we could do the following. We could put a button on the screen. I'm going to call this set. I'll put the text set on there, and I'm going to make that a little bit bigger and rename it And what does it do? Well, it'll do whatever we tell it to do. And in our case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that button, and when I click that button, I will do two things. I will set the value of the global count to 0, and I will update the label. So if I needed something done very quickly, I could do that. I could also do other things, and I'm just as an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color of the set button to yellow. Why? Because I can. So, if I get to this, and I've brought it up to that, and I say, oh, no, I want to start over again at 0, there you go. So it's a useful way of fixing things while the application is running. Now there's one other thing here. We probably want to do the same thing for the addition as for the subtraction. That is to say, if we go above the limit, we want to notify the user. So we can put an else statement in here, close that off, and change the color. You will see we run into the same problem here as we ran into with subtract. So, you don't want to wait to click this thing add 9, 10 times to get up to the problem. What we can do is we can jumpstart this with 8 so that when we look at our application, when we click set, it sets the count to 8 and we can keep going. You say, well, 10 isn't that far. What happens if if your limit instead of being 10 happened to be 1,000? So here we go. We add, we click once more and it goes red. If we hit subtract, it doesn't change the background color because we forgot to do that. So we had to do the same thing in this app that we did for subtract as we did for add. That is to say, reset the background color. And this should do it. Let's take a look. Oh, we have that to 8. So what I could do is 0, and so this will set the background color of count to 0 when we click on set, and there you go. That's it. Hope you like it.